I grew up in the kind of town where everyone showed up to your Little League games even if they didn't have a kid on the field. My father ran a small auto repair shop off Route 9, and my mother taught third grade for 31 years at the same elementary school where I had learned to read. Life moved slowly there, and people meant what they said. That upbringing stuck to me like paint on a wall. Hard work, honesty, and showing up. Those were the 3 rules my father lived by, and I never found a reason to question them. I met my wife at a 4th of July cookout the summer after I graduated from the State University with a degree in civil engineering. She was standing near the food table in the yellow dress, laughing at something her friend had said, and I spent the next 20 minutes inventing reasons to walk past the potato salad. We talked until the fireworks were long over and everyone else had gone inside. She was a nurse at the regional hospital, sharp and funny and completely unafraid to tell me when I was wrong about something. I admired that about her more than I could explain at the time. We got married 3 years later in her parents' backyard. Nothing fancy, just white light strung through the oak trees and her grandmother's recipe for lemon cake. My younger brother was my best man and cried through the entire ceremony. I kept it together, barely. Our daughter was born 18 months after that, and I remember standing in that hospital hallway thinking that I had somehow stumbled into a life I didn't deserve. She was small and furious and perfect. And from the moment I held her, I understood what people meant when they said certain things rearranged your entire interior. The years that followed were good ones. I moved up at the engineering firm, eventually making project manager. My wife worked her way into a senior nursing position at the hospital. Our daughter grew into someone I genuinely liked. Curious, stubborn in the best possible way, and talented in ways neither of us could fully explain. She picked up the violin at age 7 and was playing in the school orchestra by 10. We went to every single performance. Everyone. Looking back, I can see the slow drift starting around the time she changed departments at the hospital. She moved into a specialized cardiac unit and started working longer hours. I told myself it was the new role demanding more of her. She told me the same thing. What neither of us said out loud was that we had stopped really talking to each other somewhere in the previous 2 years. We were polite. We were functional. But we had become more like well-organized roommates than the 2 people who had talked until midnight at a 4th of July cookout. I noticed she had started texting more. Not in an obvious way. She wasn't glued to her phone at dinner or anything like that. But there were small moments. She would glance at the screen and something would shift in her expression. A tiny, suppressed smile, there and gone before I could really register it. I told myself I was imagining things. I was very good at telling myself that. The afternoon everything came apart started as an ordinary Tuesday. I left work early because our HVAC system needed a technician and someone had to be home. My wife's car was in the driveway, which surprised me since she was supposed to be on shift until 6. I figured she'd switch schedules. I came in through the garage, set my keys on the counter, and called out her name. She appeared in the doorway of the kitchen with a glass of wine in her hand and an expression I had never seen on her before. Not angry exactly. More like someone who had already finished the argument in their head and was now just delivering the verdict. She told me she had met someone else. She said his name was Derek, and that he was a cardiologist at her hospital, and that she had been seeing him for 8 months. She said she was sorry, that she hadn't meant for it to happen, but that she needed me to understand she wasn't coming back from this. She had already spoken to an attorney. She slid a manila envelope across the kitchen counter. I stood there and listened. I heard every word she said, but somewhere around the moment she mentioned 8 months, it was like someone had turned down the volume on the entire world. Her voice kept moving. Her mouth kept forming words, but I was sinking backward into some cold, airless space where none of it was quite real. I reached for the back of the kitchen chair to steady myself and missed it. The next thing I knew, I was sitting on the tile floor with my back against the cabinet, and she was standing over me saying something about whether I needed water. I don't know how long I sat there. The light in the kitchen changed. She left at some point. I was aware of the front door closing. I was still sitting on the floor when my daughter came home from school. She was 16 at the time. She walked into the kitchen, dropped her backpack, and stopped. She looked at me on the floor. She looked at the envelope on the counter. She was a smart kid, and she put it together faster than any teenager should have to. She crouched down in front of me and said, "Dad, Dad, look at me." Her voice was steady in a way that broke my heart a little. She took my face in both her hands the way I used to do to her when she was small and frightened. "I'm going to call Uncle Marcus," she said. "Don't move." My brother Marcus was a defense attorney in the city. He and I had grown up sharing a bedroom, fighting over the remote, and covering for each other through 40-odd years of minor disasters. He answered on the second ring and was at my house in 45 minutes. My daughter had gotten me off the floor by then and made me sit at the kitchen table with a glass of water. She had opened the envelope herself and was reading through the papers with a focused, furious expression that reminded me uncomfortably of her mother. Marcus came in, took one look at me, and said nothing for a moment. He just squeezed my shoulder and sat down across from me. My daughter slid the papers across the table to him. He read through everything carefully, turning pages with the deliberate calm of someone who had spent 20 years making sure nothing rattled him in a courtroom. Finally, he set the papers down and looked at my daughter. "You okay?" "I'm fine," she said. "Help my dad." He looked at me. "Did you know anything about this?" "No," I said. It was the first word I had spoken in what felt like hours. Marcus pressed his lips together. 8 months, he said almost to himself. He picked up his phone and made 2 calls, one to a colleague who handled family law, a woman named Brenda who apparently terrified opposing counsel for sport, and one to my wife's supervisor at the hospital. Because as Marcus quietly explained to me later, there were regulations about relationships between nursing staff and attending physicians in the same unit, and Derek had apparently not been careful about any of them. The next several days moved in a blur. I went to work because not going felt worse than going. My daughter went to school and came home and made dinner 3 nights in a row without being asked. She talked to me about ordinary things, her orchestra rehearsal, a history paper she was writing, and I understood that she was doing it on purpose, keeping the air in the house from going completely still. I had raised a remarkable person without fully realizing it. My wife came back to collect some of her things on a Saturday morning. My daughter was home and did not leave the room, which my wife clearly had not expected. The conversation was short and cold and precise. My wife tried once to speak to our daughter privately, and our daughter said, without raising her voice, "Whatever you want to say to me, you can say in front of Dad." My wife looked at her for a long moment, then looked at me, and I saw something flicker across her face that might have been regret. Then it was gone, and she finished loading her bags into the car. Brenda, the family law attorney Marcus had called, turned out to be a compact woman in her late 50s, with reading glasses she wore on a chain and a personality like a well-calibrated piece of heavy machinery. She met with me twice in the first week and went through the financials with a patience that I found genuinely steadying. My wife's attorney, it emerged, had made several procedural missteps in the initial filing, and Brenda had found all of them. She laid them out on the table in front of me like cards in a hand she had already decided to play. "Your wife is asking for the house, half the retirement accounts, and spousal support," Brenda said. "She is not going to get the house, and she is not going to get spousal support, because she terminated this marriage through documented infidelity, and there is a paper trail." She paused. "There is also the matter of Derek." His name in her mouth sounded like a problem she was already solving. It turned out that Derek had been married as well, and that his wife had not been informed of the situation until several weeks after mine had. Brenda was not representing Derek's wife, but she knew the attorney who was, and the two of them had apparently had a very productive conversation. The hospital's human resources department had also opened an inquiry, and Derek had been placed on administrative review pending its outcome. None of that gave me any particular satisfaction at the time. I was still waking up at 4 in the morning and staring at the ceiling and doing the arithmetic of 8 months over and over like some calculation I kept getting wrong. What helped, surprisingly, was work. There was a project manager at my firm named Claudia who ran the infrastructure division. She was 44, originally from the Pacific Northwest, and she had a habit of bringing homemade granola to Monday morning meetings in a mason jar because, as she once explained to me without a trace of irony, the vending machine options were an insult to the concept of breakfast. We had worked on overlapping projects for 3 years, and I had always liked her, in the uncomplicated way you like a colleague who does their job well and treats people decently. About 3 weeks after my wife moved out, I was sitting in the break room at 7 in the evening, eating a sandwich and staring at a structural report I wasn't actually reading. Claudia came in, got coffee, looked at me, and sat down across from me without being asked. "You look terrible," she said. "Thank you," I said. "I heard about your wife. I'm sorry." I nodded. There wasn't much to add to that. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I went through a divorce 5 years ago. My husband had been having an affair for almost a year. I found out through a text message that came through on our shared tablet while I was helping our son with homework." She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "I didn't leave the house for 4 days after that, just sat in the living room watching the cooking channel." "Did it get better?" I asked. "Significantly," she said. "Not right away, but yes." She went back to her office and I went back to my report. But something in that short exchange loosened something in my chest that had been clenched tight for weeks. Just the plain fact of being seen by another person without having to explain yourself. We started having lunch together a few times a week. It began as the kind of thing colleagues do when they're both working late, and it stayed that way for a long time. Neutral, easy, no weight attached to it. She had a son in middle school and an ex-husband she shared custody with, and a dry sense of humor that made difficult things feel more manageable. I found myself looking forward to Tuesday lunches the way I had not looked forward to anything in months. My daughter noticed. She was perceptive in the way teenagers are when it involves adults pretending not to notice things. She mentioned Claudia's name one evening in a tone that was carefully casual, and I said we were colleagues and friends, and she said, "Okay, Dad," in a tone that meant she had already drawn a conclusion and was simply giving me time to catch up. The divorce took just over 4 months. My wife contested several of the financial terms, and Brenda dealt with each objection with the same methodical precision she had applied from the beginning. In the end, my wife received a portion of the retirement accounts, as was legally appropriate, and the use of a car we had bought together 3 years earlier. She did not receive the house. She did not receive this house. She did not receive spousal support. Derek did not fare well in the hospital inquiry. He was not terminated, but he was transferred to a different facility in a different part of the state, which amounted to the same thing professionally. His own divorce was finalized within weeks of mine. My wife and Derek did not end up together. From what I heard, and I heard very little because I made a point of not asking, they had stopped seeing each other before my divorce was even finalized. I did not find this particularly satisfying, but I noticed it. The morning the papers were signed, Marcus drove to my house and brought a 6-pack of the same regional beer we had been drinking together since we were too young to be drinking at all. We sat on the back porch and I felt, for the first time in months, like I could take a full breath. "What now?" Marcus asked. "I don't know," I said. "Something different." My daughter graduated from high school 8 months later and was accepted to a university 2 states away with a strong music program. The week before she left for orientation, she sat down with me at the kitchen table and said, with the particular seriousness she used for things that actually mattered to her, "I need to know you're going to be okay here." "I'm going to be okay," I said. "Are you still having lunch with Claudia?" I looked at her. "I'm just asking," she said, not quite hiding a smile. "Yes," I said. "Good," she said. "She's good for you." She laughs at the right things. I had not yet told my daughter that the lunches had recently become dinners, and that the dinners had become something more than dinners. I was not entirely sure how to have that conversation with a 17-year-old who was simultaneously the most adult person in my immediate family and still my kid. But apparently I did not need to explain anything. She already knew. Claudia and I did not rush anything. We had both been through enough to understand the difference between moving forward and running away from something, and we had both done the second one in our previous lives and had no interest in repeating it. We took it slowly. Dinners, drives out to the lake on weekend afternoons, the gradual accumulation of small, comfortable habits. She folded laundry in a particular, methodical way that I found unreasonably endearing. I made coffee too strong, and she corrected me every single time without ever actually stopping me. Her son, who was 11 and had strong opinions about science fiction and breakfast foods, required somewhat more convincing. He warmed to me over the course of about 6 months, largely because I knew how to fix a bicycle derailleur and had no objection to watching the same movie 3 times in one weekend. My daughter, when she came home for the holidays, treated Claudia with the easy warmth she gave to people she had already decided to trust, and Claudia gave it back without ceremony. They found each other over coffee one morning while I was shoveling the driveway, and when I came back inside, they were deep in a conversation about something I was apparently not meant to be part of. I stood there dripping melting snow on the kitchen floor and felt a specific, quiet happiness that I had given up on expecting. Marcus officially finalized my divorce papers on a Thursday in March and called me afterward to say, without a great deal of preamble, "You should marry her." He had met Claudia twice. I was not surprised by the opinion. 2 years after my wife moved out, I proposed to Claudia at the lake where we had first started going on Saturday afternoons. Nothing elaborate. I had the ring in my jacket pocket, and I gave a speech that I had rehearsed approximately 40 times and delivered approximately 0 times in the way I had rehearsed it. She laughed through most of it and said yes before I had finished the last sentence. My daughter, when I called her that evening, said "finally," and then immediately started asking about the wedding. We got married the following October. Small ceremony. Close family. People from work. A few neighbors who had been good to me during the difficult year. My daughter played a piece on the violin during the ceremony that she had chosen herself and not told me about in advance. It was something by Faure, quiet and precise, and somehow both happy and a little sad, the way the best music manages to be. I was not going to cry. I cried. My ex-wife and I had very little contact in the years that followed. She had moved to another city to be closer to family. My daughter maintained a careful, measured relationship with her. Coffee a few times a year, a call on her birthday. I did not push either direction. That was between the two of them. What I did not expect was the afternoon, about 2 years after my wedding, when my daughter called me from the coffee shop near her apartment and said, in a careful voice, "Mom wants to talk to you. I didn't plan this. She's sitting right here. I just want you to know I'm not trying to start anything." My ex-wife got on the phone. She sounded different from the woman I remembered. Smaller, somehow, quieter. She said she had wanted to say something to me for a long time and had not known how to start. She said she knew she had handled everything badly. She said she knew what she had done to our family was wrong and that she was sorry. Not as a formality, but because she meant it and because she needed me to hear it, even if I never accepted it. I sat with that for a moment. "I accept it," I said. "I'm not carrying it anymore. I haven't been for a while." She was quiet. Then she said, "You seem happy." "I am," I said. And I meant it in a way that required no qualification whatsoever. Derek, I heard through a mutual acquaintance some time after that, had remarried quickly and quietly. There were rumors of additional complications at his new position that I did not investigate. Some people are simply who they are, and they carry that with them wherever they go. I found that I did not particularly need to know how his story ended. My own was more interesting. My daughter defended her graduate thesis in music theory 3 years later and accepted a teaching fellowship at a university in New England. Claudia's son finished high school and decided he wanted to study aerospace engineering, a choice that I may have had something to do with. We drove him to his campus orientation on a Sunday in August and spent the drive back in a contented, slightly tired silence with the windows down. Claudia and I still work at the same firm. We made a specific agreement early on about not letting the professional and the personal blur in ways that would damage either. We have kept it with the discipline of two people who have both learned what happens when you don't protect the things that matter. At the office, we are colleagues. At home, we are, whatever word exists for two people who have built something real out of the wreckage of something that didn't work, and who know exactly how lucky they are. I think about my father sometimes, his 3 rules: hard work, honesty, and showing up. I spent a lot of time after my divorce wondering if I had somehow failed at one of them, if I had not worked hard enough at the marriage, not been honest enough about what was wrong between us, not shown up in the ways that mattered. I spent a good amount of time with a therapist working through that question. And what I arrived at, slowly, with some resistance, was that the rules still held. I had followed them. And so had my daughter. And so, when it counted, had every person who had shown up for me in that first terrible year. The failure was not in the rules. Some things simply break. What you do after they break is the part that defines you. On the first anniversary of our wedding, Claudia and I went back to the lake. It was cold, late October, the trees nearly bare. We brought coffee and thermoses and sat on the same bench where I had proposed with a speech that went sideways and a ring that took 4 stores to find. She leaned against me, and I put my arm around her, and we sat there watching the water go still in the way it does when the wind drops. That absolute flat gray quiet that somehow contains more calm than almost any other thing I know. "Happy?" she asked. "Unreasonably," I said. She laughed. It was the particular laugh she had for things she found genuinely funny rather than politely funny. A laugh that meant you had gotten something exactly right. I had spent 2 years cataloging the difference between those 2 laughs, and I was still not tired of it. My daughter called that evening, as she always did on our anniversary, to check in. She talked for 20 minutes about her students and a recital she was organizing and whether or not she was going to adopt a second cat, a deliberation that had apparently been ongoing for 3 months. Before she hung up, she said, with the same plain directness she had had at 16, crouching on the kitchen floor beside me, "I'm proud of you, Dad, just so you know." I stayed on the porch for a while after that, holding the phone. The lake was dark by then. The first lights were coming on across the water. It was the kind of evening where everything felt, briefly and without exaggeration, exactly as it should be. The weight of what was lost in proper proportion to the weight of what remained. Neither one drowning out the other, both of them present, both of them honest, both of them mine.